Now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator and panelists. Michael Ferro is the founder and chairman and CEO of Merrick Ventures, a technology investment company that has helped transform the industries of manufacturing, financial services, healthcare through internet technology. Michael is also the chairman of Rapport, which owns the Chicago Sun-Times and over 40 regional publications. Michael has served on the club's board of directors since 2004. He is dedicated to developing future leaders and entrepreneurs and is engaged civically through numerous organizations. Welcome, Michael. On our panel today, we are delighted to have with us some of the leading tech disruptors in the country. Michael Fertik, founder and CEO of Reputation.com, Matt Maloney, Chief Executive Officer of GrubHub, Seamless, and Victoria Ransom, co-founder and CEO of Wildfire. Please join me in welcoming them and our own beloved disruptor, Michael Ferro.
All right, well, thanks, Phyllis. That was an awesome introduction. This is going to be fun. This is our first forum of the year, and Donna and Phyllis have done a great job getting everything organized. So the first thing I want to point out is we gave this title Disruptors in Tech. And the funny thing, as I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, is their resumes. These are not typical entrepreneurs. The one thing I'll point out to you, of those of you who got to read their bios, is all three of these individuals are from the system. They're very well educated. They all actually graduated. We have 2 Harvard degrees, a JD from Harvard, an MBA from Harvard, and an MBA from Booth. This is not the Zuckerberg, Bill Gates story, but this is more realistic of how the world is changing, that this is what the next generation looks like. So today, we kind of want to debunk some myths.
I'd rather be in the Zuckerberg.
Okay, well, that's fine. Michael, sorry. So would I, actually. But let's just go. Let's just deal with what we have. So I want to start out with, so first of all, Matt Maloney is our own disruptor here in Chicago. I've known Matt for a long time, but you know what I want when you each talk about your company, I want to figure out what was the moment. I have a little background on why you're doing this, but what was the moment that you went from being just a part of the system, going to school, doing things, and being with all of them had jobs at companies, except Michael, maybe. Maybe Michael. I don't know if you ever had a real job. Have you, Michael?
No.
Okay, except Michael. So Matt, why don't you go tell us your story?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here. And for those of you that don't know about GrubHub, we're the nation's leading online ordering for takeout and delivery food ordering service. So we founded in Chicago in 2004. And back then I had a job. I didn't have an MBA, and Mike Evans, for those of you that know Mike, just came up with the idea and started working on it. And it was a lot of fun. It was problem solving. It was challenging. And then we grew it to a point where we recognized that it was actually a business model, and it was something that was about to drive money. And that was a daunting realization. It was scary because we didn't know what the hell we were going to do with this money. Like, we didn't know how to pay taxes, for example. Just a very tactical, silly thing, but we were programmers and we had no idea what to do. And so that's why I ended up going to B school, and I went to Booth because I actually got my comp sci graduate degree there. And so going to business school for the purpose of business logistics probably wasn't the smartest thing to do. However, I learned a lot of very interesting things at Booth, and it was great. It was great for the company and for myself. When you ask when was the moment when you kind of figured out that it was right then, 2005, when restaurants were calling us saying, "Can I pay you? How do I pay you to get more orders?" That's what the question was, and I got it frequently. And I got it frequent enough that I knew that I had to do something. I had to build something in order to allow them to pay us, because that was it's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was. What was the second part of your question?
Second part of the question, I was going to ask Michael about his.
Yes.
I don't know.
Is Zuckerberg story?
Yeah, the Zuckerberg story. So Michael, want to tell us about Reputation.com?
So Reputation.com protects reputation and privacy on the internet. I started the company in 2006. I think the story that you may be asking about is the story of my first company, which I started when I was 19 and in college. And it was initially a consumer site that was intended to compete with eBay. eBay won, in case you don't know, had the outcome. But there was a moment there when we were juniors when a company called Idealab, which was very hot to trot, flew us out to LA and offered to buy our company. And then with great temerity, we turned them down. That call turned out to be a good call, not because we knew it was going to be a good call, but because the B2C industry collapsed very quickly, and we pivoted. In Silicon Valley, we call changing your mind pivoting because it sounds better. So we pivoted, and we became a B2B company and made a matching algorithm for B2B marketplaces, and we grew and sold that business. And then I went to law school. The reason I went to law school, so it's a backward story for you, is that I come from a very kind of Jewish, I had a very Jewish, Talmudic, romantic, and mistaken idea about what law school was going to be like. And I survived it, even though I had to discover that law school is not what I want it to be. It turns out to be much more what it is advertised as being, which is a professional school. And it was after law school that I started Reputation.com. And so it was a deliberate choice, both not to leave school because we didn't think the offer from Idealab was rich enough. And you have to understand that Idealab owned eToys, which was, a multiple billion-dollar proposition at that time. And then it was a deliberate decision to get back into entrepreneurship after graduate school.
Victoria?
All right. So I'm founder and CEO of a company called Wildfire, which is a social media marketing software company. So we work with many large brands, I think 31 of the world's top 50 brands, to provide them with a suite of tools to help them manage their brand pages across different social networks. Started the company in 2008 while doing an MBA. And scaled it very rapidly. We got to almost 400 employees when we were acquired by Google about a year ago. But my story is a little similar to yours, where I think the actual big point of do I continue down a more traditional career path or do I become an entrepreneur was back in 2001 when I was working at Morgan Stanley. I'd been there for almost 2 years and ended up leaving at the height of a recession to start a travel company. And for me at the time, I think it was two things, which is quite similar to the decision process with Wildfire as well. One was I wasn't loving what I was doing. I was, 23. I felt like there's got to be more to life than this. So that was one driver of really seeking out something else. The other was I really felt like, what's the worst that can happen? I can start this company. It might fail, probably will. They usually do. Well, then I'll go to graduate school. That's what I was planning to do anyway. 5 years later, I did eventually go to graduate school. I think the decision there was the travel company was doing really great, but it was not a Wildfire. It was not this kind of a growth. So I really got to a point of, do I want to do this for the rest of my life, or am I ready for another change? I was ready for a change. Business school is a great place to go, explore other options. I didn't go in assuming I would come out an entrepreneur, but honestly, really quickly in the first few months, when recruiters started coming around and I looked at the opportunities, nothing was exciting me, and that's when I realized, okay, I'm probably going to look for another opportunity to start a company. But both times it was always, what is the worst that can happen? Worst that can happen is that you fail, and I'm well enough educated I can go off and get a job, so it didn't feel like a massive risk.
So just so we can go with our headline, Disruptors in Tech, one of the quick questions, because we have a lot for you, is what makes your businesses disruptive? Who have you been displacing, or what are you changing? And Matt, I think, why don't we start with you, Michael, then Victoria, then Matt.
So our objective is to invert the basic business model of the internet. So it's a very
that's really simple.
Yeah,
okay.
it's a big objective.
I think that was enough, right? We got it. So to invert the
basic business model of the internet. So here's the basic business model of the internet when you take away all the nouns and verbs. If you look at the first $1 trillion of wealth that's been created on the web, and you set aside hardware companies and ISPs, 90% of what's left is advertising. And so the basic trick that people like us are good at is we give you something to use free, we collect your data without your knowledge or permission, and we sell it to people you can't identify for purposes you could never know. And we call that an advertising business. Now, there's nothing Machiavellian about it. Most of the people I know who run these companies are very decent sorts, but you are the product, and that's ineluctable and unavoidable as the essential conclusion of the business model of the internet. I think we can do better. If you talk to the guys who are now in their kind of 80s, the godfathers of the internet, the people who built the internet, who are so good to us that they made no money from the internet, the gift givers of the internet, they say that among the things they say is that they forgot to succeed in getting the authentication layer of the internet built. What that sounds like to a layperson is that you have to identify yourself every time you go somewhere. But to a technologist, that sounds like, well, every time you go somewhere on the web, you can be fully anonymous, all the way to retinal scan, nuclear launch codes, identify yourself very carefully. And the promise of the authentication layer of the internet is that you would finally and ultimately be the atomic unit of the internet. One of the big myths of the internet is that the internet's about you. It's not. It's about us, the entrepreneurs. And the idea is that we should invert that and actually fulfill the promise of the internet. What does that actually look like? Our proposition is what we call a data vault. That means that your data that you know are there are sitting in a vault for you, and then you get to release them selectively and electively to third parties whenever you want for specific value explicitly received. So instead of your data being mined for advertising or for healthcare purposes or for insurance purposes or for job search purposes, which is now what's happening, it's much more than advertising Nikes versus Manolo Blahniks. It's about your health, it's about your kids' futures, your job prospects. Instead of that, you finally get control over your data. So our idea, our disruptive idea, our main idea is to launch the data vault, make it ubiquitous, and give you control over your data finally for the internet.
And that's just for $99 a year I can have control.
For $99 a year.
Okay, great. All right. Victoria?
So we're part of the social media revolution, which is disrupting the world in many ways, but specifically in the marketing part of it. So how is social media changing the way businesses do things, and particularly the way businesses market themselves? And so I think the way we're helping to disrupt things is really this older model of push marketing, where marketing used to be about pushing your message out to as many people as you possibly could. Hopefully it resonates with someone. You didn't necessarily know exactly who you're reaching. It wasn't particularly well targeted, but people passively had to consume it whether they liked it or not, and you hope that it worked. To a world where I think consumers are now not willing to accept that. They have many, many different ways where they can block out your advertising. So you have to make sure that your content is valuable, it has to be relevant, and really to be successful, you have to get people to be your advocates and pass on your message to people who trust them, and so on and so forth. So really, I think we're a part of what is a pretty strong movement now that's shaking up the way that brands advertise and market themselves, and it's all about making sure that you really reach people in a way that's valuable for them, so they pass the word on about you.
All right. Matt?
So I don't know how disruptive what we've done actually is, but when you think
Okay,
about
how many people here use GrubHub? Let's take a raise your hands if you've ever used GrubHub.
I think each and every one of you.
All right, there you go.
No, but I mean, we didn't, I mean, social media is disruptive. It's a brand new thing. Like, it's totally new. We put a technical harness around something that everyone has done for years, hundreds of years. I mean, people order food from their local restaurants. What we did that was different is and what technology allows you to do is make it in a scalable structure. So we put the technology and the framework around search and transaction between an individual and the set of their local restaurants, and we did that in such a way that could be replicated across the country. And all across the country, everyone's ordering delivery. And so when you think about disruptive versus not disruptive, it wasn't rocket science when we did it, although the intuition that ended up being very powerful was, why can't we order online? Why can't I say, I'm here, who delivers to me? Why does that not exist? Because the data's there, and technology was certainly there in 2004. And then so just you have these disparate data points and just kind of connecting the dots, and all of a sudden you have something that is just extraordinarily powerful.
This points up a very important distinction. There are only two kinds of venture-backed companies that are worth talking about. One is faster, better, cheaper, and the other is Brave New World. And neither is more noble than the other. So in fact, what you did is disruptive, but it was disruptive in the faster, better, cheaper mechanism. You know people want to order food at home or wherever they are, and you're making it much faster, better, and cheaper for them to do so. And by the way, the most successful version of that was Google, which was the fastest, best, and cheapest version of search, which was not the first mechanism of search that was born on the internet, right? Then there's Brave New World, which is you're making a market that didn't exist before. Maybe Victoria's company is an example. eBay would be an example. Intuit would be the example. Doing a business that no one's ever imagined before, either riding a wave of a new market or creating a wave that creates a new market. So one way to think about venture as you think about your investments and your consumption and your public securities investments is, which do I care about more? which is more constant? With me, faster, better, cheaper tends to have more successful exits. They tend to be smaller. The bigger, the counterexamples are Google and Facebook. The Brave New World companies tend to be more capital intensive. They tend to fail more often, but when they succeed, they tend to be bigger exits. Those are on the margin, right? But I mean, Matt's company is going to be huge at exit.
Well, this is a big question that everyone wants to know is getting started. Now, Victoria, I read somewhere, hopefully it's true, is that you said that one of your biggest regrets was not moving to Silicon Valley sooner or putting your business. So is that something similar to what you said? What was your
I
exact
might have
quote?
said that at some point.
Yes, you
I
did
believe
say
that I said
it. Yeah, so in
to the
starting the
Palo
companies,
Alto Booster Club?
right? What's that?
To the Palo Alto Booster Club?
Palo Alto.
Well, I'll do that. I'll do the Booster Club if you want. After
Sure.
she
Why don't
goes.
you talk about, and then why don't we
Yeah.
talk about first getting started, location? I mean, how important is that? Do you believe because we were talking about tech disruption? How important is your location? to get
So
started?
I think if I said that, and I believe I did, it would have been much less about, because I think that Silicon Valley is the only place to start a successful company, and much more because it took me from graduating in undergrad in 1999 to 2008 when I graduated from HBS to really get the type of business that highly scalable, tech-driven, could take off like a rocket ship. In the meantime, I did investment banking, and I started a travel company, which was an awesome opportunity to test try myself out with running a business, but it was not technology-driven. It was never going to scale. So I think it was much more about, I think if I had have been in that environment in 1999, I might have gotten into the tech world much, much sooner, but a lot of people did that and crashed and burned, so maybe I was lucky to avoid that. In terms of where should you be based, I think Silicon Valley was a fabulous place for us to be based in terms of our core partners. So we were close to Facebook, we were close to Twitter, we were close to LinkedIn and other really important partners that helped us a lot. On the flip side, our main clients were more typically based in New York and Chicago. Yeah. So pros and cons from a talent. A lot of people based in Silicon Valley because they think that's where all the talent is. There is talent, but the fight for talent is so intense, and you're competing with Google and Facebook that can offer way more than you ever can. So in fact, over 50% of our employees we imported from other parts of the United States or from overseas. So I don't think you locate in the Valley for a talent unless you're willing to bring people in. So I think there's pros and cons to both. I think people often use the argument as well that funding is easier to come by in the Valley. Maybe, but I think if you've got a good business, you can get funding wherever. So I don't think it's a prerequisite to success at all, but it was important and helpful to us in certain aspects of our business.
You want to go, Matt? You're in Chicago.
No, I think that if all things being equal, the best place to start a technology startup is the Valley. I don't think there's a question, and the reason, the challenge historically is that if you want to build a tech startup elsewhere, it's more difficult. But like, for example, we didn't ever want to leave. We have family and friends here. We have roots. We didn't want to go anywhere. But if none of those restrictions apply, the fact that you have these major companies and most of the innovation in the space is out there. And so to be able to tap into those lines of thinking, the cocktail parties, just the lunches, I think that there's more potential.
Do you have to go out there for your business right now, Matt?
I don't ever go out there anymore. Our BD folks, though, our corp dev folks definitely do. And there's requirements of you have to be out there at least once a month, just because you have to have these conversations. But since we founded in 2004, at least Chicago and also New York to a good degree, because since we merged with Seamless, I've gotten to know the New York space really well. Both of those markets have become someplace where it is much, much easier to create a successful startup here. And I think that's some of the scalability of finance, as you were saying, the talent. There's no question it's easier to find talent that stays with you in Chicago and also in New York versus the Valley. And so there's pluses and minuses, and whereas 10 years ago, if you had a really good idea, you would honestly have to think to yourself, do I need to move to the Valley or not? Now you don't have to. Now you can stay here, and there's enough resources locally that you can grow and be rather successful.
Michael?
Yeah, okay, so I think the case has already been made for me, so I think I have less to say. I think if you're Matt, then Chicago makes a lot of sense, right? So he's already a known entity and a big figure here, and yet he still acknowledges that Silicon Valley is what it is. the tricky part about visiting an amazing, by the way, I realize this is the fugitive room, and I just keep waiting for Harrison Ford to come bursting in. I was sitting here saying, oh, it's the fugitive room. Yeah, so if I were starting a company today in internet, I would start, just internet, not biotech. I would start in Silicon Valley or Boston or San Diego. And so Silicon Valley is obvious. Boston because you have Harvard and MIT, and they're now very underutilized resources. Those kids think that New York is cool. New York has very significant limitations because once you get past 25, 30 people, cost of infrastructure gets extremely high. I'm no bid for New York. I think Matt's experience is more significant than mine, but my own opinion is I'm no bid for New York for 10 years, after which Technion will be producing enough graduates to actually create a local phenomenon there in a way that's not possible now. And Boston, though, you have Harvard and MIT, you have very little competition, you can get the talent, keep the talent. And in San Diego, you have a lot of defense technology kids who are chiefly not A+ and A++ in engineering, but a lot of A's, A-, and they don't want to leave San Diego because it's so gorgeous. So you can have an outfit there. But there's no way to recreate Silicon Valley. I'm often asked by local municipal governments or state or national governments or ministers, how do you do Silicon Valley in our country or in our place? It's just not possible. You need a super hyper overabundance of stuff. By the way, it's not the money, it's not the funding. The funding will flow. We know that. Money will find the target. It's the talent, it's the mojo, it's the attitude, it's the culture, and it's the fluidity. And then sometimes there's the kind of the law around the jurisdiction about non-competes and stuff. The only place I think that can meaningfully compete is Israel right now, and they have huge systemic disadvantages to Silicon Valley. If America continues to have a bad immigration policy, then we will give London a chance. Right now, we know that the most famous brands in Silicon Valley have opened up development centers explicitly in London because they cannot bring the people to America, right? So we are gifting high-tech, high-value jobs to London because we have such a bad and broken immigration policy.
That's true. All right, we have a few more minutes before we go to the audience for questions. So, I'm going to pick on Victoria again, but I have a question for all of you. Each have a minute. Is how did you attract? I know you're all very well educated. Your first round and your second round. How did you do it? Who did you do it? And if there's any advice for people looking at doing it. So I'll start with you, Victoria. I already know the answer for your first round, but why don't you tell us?
So we were fortunate that we were able to, we got a grant. So we bootstrapped, and then we got a grant from Facebook, in fact, which was enough to launch a product which was enough to get to profitability before we ever needed to raise money. So when it was time to raise money,
so you were profitable. How much did you raise your first round from Facebook? What was your grant?
Oh, it was a $250,000 grant.
And then you were profitable.
Yes. So we ran the business very leanly to get there. And then we continued to run a lean operation. Then we raised a $4 million Series A. Actually never tapped into that money until we changed business models. And then the Series B was an insider round. So
where was the Series A raised from mostly? Where were the investors
from? It was a growth equity fund, Summit.
Summit. Summit. Yeah. Okay, Michael knows Summit. Okay, Michael, how about you? Round one, round two. You've done like 7 rounds. So.
We've done 4 rounds.
Okay, if it looks like 7, it's $67 million.
We've done 4 rounds. One was 41 of the $67 million. So I've tried to raise money 4 times. I have raised money 4 times, but I succeeded in trying once of those 4 times. So only once did I actually go out and try to raise money and succeed in raising money. The other 3 times we raised money, the money found us because the news, it's just like anything else, right? When you kind of are showing some leg, nobody wants to date you, I guess. But Eddie, every time I don't know if that's the right metaphor. Is that the right metaphor? Can you show some leg?
I was going to show some leg, and my wife left.
Well, no, when you're trying to market yourself. So I have just decided I'm never trying to raise money again. That is my new policy. So
and where did you raise your first round, though, Michael?
The first round was Mike Maples. Again, he found us. Mike Maples with Floodgate. Now it's called Floodgate. It used to be called Maples. And we were cash flowing. In our first full year, we did 1.2 million in sales, and we were just cash flowing. And and all of a sudden, we were growing very fast, and all of a sudden, this guy shows up. It was only $1 million, but that took us to where we needed to go, and then more money found us. By the way, I raised that money in January of 2008, and then my master plan was to hit all our numbers and go raise money in September of 2008. And we crushed all our numbers, and on September 5th, I started to raise money, and I was like, oh, this is not working. And we shut it down. We had a layoff. We laid off 25% of our workforce, and very painful, very bad morale. By the way, I had gone in front of my team in like July and August, and I'd said, you know, we're probably entering a recession. We don't know, it's kind of a bad sign, but I'm definitely not laying anyone off. And then 2 months later, you know, recession-geddon hits, and something beyond anyone in this room's memory even. And I had to go in front of my team, and I had to say that I had said something that wasn't true, which was very painful. So I cut my salary almost to zero as a first step, tried to save it, then we had a 25% layoff. And then we had our best quarters ever, and then the money found us in spring of 09 rather. We raised our first sort of substantial round of a few $1 million, and then the rest was history. But yeah, so yeah, I think the prescription that I've followed and a lot of entrepreneurs follow is, you know, when you don't need it, that's when they'll find you. So
Matt, round one, round two.
So we founded in 2004, and then we bootstrapped for 3 years, and then we ended up wanting to go and expand our market into San Francisco, and we needed outside capital for that because we were doing well to grow one market, but we needed resources, and so we found the esteemed investment institution of Origin Ventures out of Northbrook. Bruce Barron and Steve Miller over there in the corner. Thanks, guys. So they
Good for them, actually.
good for them.
I gotta tell you, congratulations.
So they're doing quite well. But similar story, we went into San Francisco, Boston, and New York with that money, and then late 2008, we wanted to go into the next 10 markets, and of course the recession Yeti was upon us. And because we had bootstrapped for so long, we overextended ourselves, so we didn't have to end up doing that because we were very cognizant of the cash out the door for salaries versus advertisement. And then we found another actual local investor. We were looking for Chicago money for our first round because we had not done it before. I hadn't had previous experiences, and so we wanted somebody who could be in the room with us at the board meetings and really kind of help us think through the challenges and how to scale a company. But we found our B round locally as well. The first round was 1, the second round was 2, and then from there, honestly, the money basically found us. I think our C round, I did end up going to Sand Hill for one meeting, and I think I left Sand Hill 4 days later after 12 meetings, and I was just being pulled in every direction, and I ended up closing, you know, pretty much as fast as possible.
And that's how it goes, right? The last round we did, 41 million bucks, took us, we started Monday afternoon, it was done Tuesday morning. That's, when it goes, right?
Well, great. Well, with that, Phyllis is going to take questions from the audience, and I'll
That's
let you take
great.
over, Phyllis.
Thank you all for a terrific discussion, and I'm going to facilitate questions so we can also have Michael Ferro respond. If you would like to pose a question, please stand, and a reception committee member holding a green ECC paddle will bring you the microphone. Reception committee members, give a broad wave so we know where you are.
Try to deliver.
Great. First question? Are there any first questions? Okay, all the way in the back here.
Hello. You talked about talent. Could you give us a snapshot of what your leadership team looks like in terms of age and gender? And then the follow-up question would be, what would it take to hire somebody into your leadership team over the age of 50?
Who wants to handle that first?
I'm not touching that.
Okay, Victoria, you have to be politically correct now. You're part of Google.
Well, I'm going to talk about, I think, the leadership team before we got acquired, because it has evolved. We've been a part of Google. It's different now. Everybody's reporting into different functional groups within Google, so they don't report into me anymore. When we got acquired, or around that time, our CMO was a woman. So we had 2 women that were senior members of the team. We had head of engineering that I don't know his age, but I think it's over 50. And then the rest of the team was male and young. In general, our team was, for most of the time that we were growing the company, pretty inexperienced. And I actually think that played in our favor quite a lot of the time because we didn't know what we couldn't do. And so things like, we raised very little money relative to the size of company that we were. That could have gone wrong, but it worked out really, really well for us. And I think had we had a really seasoned team that had been out there and done this 5 times before, we would have gone out and raised a ton more money and done things much more by the book. But as we started to grow, there was definitely this point that every company gets to where certain members of the management team hit a level of experience that they hit a ceiling, I guess. And that's when we started to bring in more seasoned executives. And soon after that, we got acquired. And actually, I think had we kept doing that, it would have dramatically changed the culture of the company. When I say seasoned, I'm not talking about age, actually. I'm just talking about these sort of people that in Silicon Valley go from funded, VC-funded company to VC-funded company, kind of hired guns, I think of them as. And I think they can be great, but I think if you ever had a tough time in your company, then those are the first ones out. Whereas ours was very much homegrown, extremely loyal to the company, extremely loyal to the mission, and it created a certain culture and style of management in our company that I think worked really well, but we did have to evolve over time.
Matt, anything to add about
Matt, as your lawyer, I suggest you be very careful what you say.
It's funny because we've always had nearly 50% of our senior leadership team women, and it's not because we had a stated goal to do that. We've always just hired the best people for the role, and not ever doing this before and having a tremendous amount of experience. When we started, we cast really broad nets when we do any exec search. And that's really paid off for us well. We've had actually pretty incredible diversity if you think about in terms of age and gender and race and across the board in our leadership team. And now post merger, I think there's 7 senior execs and there's 6 people that report to me, and 2 of them now are women, and then the majority of the set under that are actually women. So I think diversity is a phenomenal thing, and we talk about it all the time. The challenge is finding women in technology, honestly, and it's the women who program or the women who run process engineering. That's just really hard to find. So when we find a resume, we get really excited, and we try really hard to make it work. We want to promote that.
Well, the good news too is in my companies is we're all just getting that age now. So the good news is we're getting there. But for women, it is hard to find women in tech. Actually, it was Margot Georgiadis who helped us find Victoria, because we took months because we wanted to find a tech, a woman entrepreneur of stature, and we had to go really work hard. And so we want to see more women jumping into that. At our companies, half of my management teams are women also. So it's here, just takes a little time. Next question.
Yeah, I think there was another one in the same table back there, right behind you.
Do I have to hold the green paddle while I talk? Okay, good. So first of all, thank you for sharing your information on your leadership team makeup. It sounds like you're doing a great job, and that's fantastic. When it comes to women in positions of senior leadership, there's a dearth. They're grossly underrepresented in most companies, and we hear that women are making a lot of progress, and that's great. We now have, you name it, so many women, 1, 2, 3, 2%, 5%, it's great progress. And when asked, why aren't there more, we still keep hearing there are still barriers. What do you all think those barriers are, aside from the one that you just mentioned, saying that you really are having a hard time finding them in the STEM?
So Michael's ready to bring his best Sheryl Sandberg impression out and lean in. Give us an answer,
I have good news. I feel like I'm the bearer of good news. So I'm very bullish on the prospects of technical women in Silicon Valley. Technical women in Silicon Valley, not marketing women in Silicon Valley, technical women in Silicon Valley, which will give rise to all the things that we are talking about: more senior executives, more entrepreneurs, more engineering leaders. Here's the good news. It's not what most of us in this room would like to be true, but it's different, and I think still very good news. And I've been writing a piece in the Scientific American about this that my PR person doesn't want me to publish yet. So here's a preview. If you look at QA, quality assurance, QA, 10, 15 years ago, it was all men. Now it's 100% women. So it's South Asian and Eastern European women immigrants. What that means is, in some short number of years, the engineers, who often come from QA backgrounds, will be 50% women. So I'm actually very hopeful. Here's what is not true, or not as impactfully true as far as I can tell. your kids will not be the ones we're talking about. By the way, your sons are also not the ones we're talking about. Engineers in Silicon Valley are still overwhelmingly first generation or fresh off the boat immigrants who are from South Asia, Eastern Europe, East Asia. And this is now replicating among women. So if we care about the gender balance, I think that problem is healing itself extremely quickly. I think that ship has sailed in the same way that gay marriage has sailed. There's no turning that ship back. If you oppose it, sorry, it's too late. Get with the program, get with the boat. In the same way, the ship is sailing. Women are going to be a major part, if not 50% or better, of the future of Silicon Valley. However, this is not about kids of white, wealthy parents whose daughters go to school to study engineering. So that's the part that I think you want to hear, but it's not. The good news is America's solving the problem without us. So I think I'm bearing good news. I hope you feel I am.
Great. I think there was one over here.
You talked about diversity as an important element of culture. What are some other things that create a successful corporate culture for a startup?
I think empowerment. Actually, and this is something, and I think I heard you say something about this, employees is the wrong term, but the people who are on your team who are working on the project with you are empowered to solve problems. They get very excited about the work they're doing. And when you bring in hired guns to run the company, it's almost like, it kind of rubs people the wrong way because they want to be able to address the challenges. And so empowering people to make decisions and including them and having them be a part of the process of scaling and growth is very important to create the culture of taking responsibility for the results.
I think at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of different types of cultures that can work. I mean, if you look at the difference in culture of a company like Apple to a company like Google to a company like Facebook to a company like Oracle, very different leadership styles, very different cultures. So I feel like what I've come to learn as a leader is nobody can teach you in a textbook what is the right culture. You can't learn that in business school. You can't read a book about that. It has to be authentic to the leadership, which starts with the CEO and the founders, but continues with the leadership team. You've got to take your authentic style and turn it into a good, strong culture. So in our company, and this was very consistent with my values, my co-founders' values, transparency was incredibly important, empowerment was incredibly important. The next great idea coming from anyone in the company and enabling people to have a voice was very important. I could never have been Steve Jobs' management style. That would have been ridiculous, just like Steve Jobs wouldn't have had my management style. Doesn't mean that it's interesting, I'm comparing myself to Steve Jobs even, but hey.
Do it, get it to go, do it.
Right.
Do it.
You heard it here.
But what I found is you can write up as many cultural values as you like. It's all just words on paper unless it's consistent with the leadership and who you're hiring. I mean, the culture of our company was based on the types of people that we hired. And when you get big enough, you can hire people that are not all completely aligned around cultural values. And I'm not talking about similarity of backgrounds. I'm talking about values. But in those early days, it's the people and what they believe in and their style that creates the culture of the company, and you have to turn it into something that then becomes powerful, that motivates people, that inspires people, that gets the best out of people, that gets people to stick around, that gets people to refer their friends, all of that sort of thing. And for us, I felt like that became a real competitive advantage for us at Wildfire. We were able to recruit, we didn't pay the highest dollar, we were able to retain in a super tight job market and a very competitive hiring environment.
So building on that, having a culture and saying it clearly are really important. So, Sequoia Capital, right? So it's important to know who you are and to say it because there's always going to be enough talent and enough stuff to go your way if you're very clear because the market's big enough, there are enough people, enough talent. So Sequoia, Sequoia, the venture, right? We all know it's Sequoia. So Sequoia, what does the Sequoia stand for? So my version of what Sequoia stands for is they will make money every single time. They will crush your founder dream and they will fire you and replace you with a better CEO. That's what they stand for. And it works for them, okay? It works for them. They crush it with returns, they crush it with their LLPs, they crush it with their deals. They do a very good job. It means that I do not want to get in bed with them, but they do a very good job. So knowing who you are. So One, and by the way, knowing who you are, even if it's not a very sort of immediately popular principle. So one principle that we offer, I talk about 5 religious principles in our company. One is, we call it the free market principle, which is to say that we don't hire people and motivate them. We hire motivated people and then don't demotivate them. What that means is, if you're putting your hand up and you're kicking ass, you're dominating your job, we'll give you more responsibility. And if you're not, then you're already on the way out of the company. By the way, that's not the way to run other companies. It's not the way to run a large company with many tens of thousands of people. But a startup, it can work. For us, it works. I hope it's not how I run my household, right? But the question is, how do you run your company? So it's to be very, very clear, know who you are, and not be afraid of who you are, because there will be enough talent who are attracted to working with you to make it work.
That's great. Stephanie?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
We'll translate it.
We'll
We'll
repeat it.
I'll
translate
repeat
it.
it.
Public education.
And autonomy and purpose and meaning and thinking outside the box, all the things that you did. You talked about the kind of culture that would more likely develop innovation and entrepreneurship. If you were the Secretary of Education, what would you do to ensure that there is not a huge disconnect between the kind of learning and immersion that our kids are currently in places called schools, and the kind of culture and innovative and entrepreneurial environment so critical for the kinds of minds that you are clearly demonstrating?
Well, Victoria, you're from New Zealand, so you should be expert on this.
Totally an expert
You're an expert.
in the U.S. public education
Sure,
system.
why not? Why don't you take it?
Well, so I didn't. I went to high school in New Zealand. I went to a public high school in New Zealand. It was not even a very good school, actually. What worked for me was parents who really encouraged me, and I was fortunate enough to get into a group of friends. The way it happened in New Zealand, I don't know how it happens here in the US, is they put people in it was called streams. So even though it wasn't a great high school, I tested into a stream of students that were all doing well, and that created a great environment for me, perhaps not for others, probably not for others that didn't test into that stream. So I'm not saying that's great for everyone, it happened to work for me. For me, I don't know the system well enough, but it would feel like it would be things like exposing kids to, the value of exposing kids to great role models at a young age, I think, is so critical, particularly if kids aren't getting that in their own community or in their home. So the question earlier about what is the barrier to women, having enough women in technology, and I think your answer was really interesting. I think part of the problem for women not ending up in technical careers is because at a very young age, they're assuming that's not the right path for them because they're not getting role models, they're not getting exposure to that as a great career path for them. And I know I spoke to a woman recently who talked about her little girl who was 8 years old, loved playing chess with her dad, joined the chess club, went twice, came home the third time, or the end of the second time, said, I'm never going again. When they dug into it, why? Her little girlfriends were making fun of her because only boys were in the chess club. So those boys go off and they play chess, and that little girl dropped out, and look what happened. So role models, I would think something about shaking up the education system to encourage people to not learn for a test that they take at the end of the year, but to try things hands-on, whether it's creating little businesses. I remember we did this in high school. You had to band together and you had to come up with a business idea and you had to execute on that. I don't know if that happens in the US, but that was great if you could do that at a younger age. Just getting kids to think out of the box a little bit instead of learning facts and figures feels like it would be very important. Maybe this is happening already. But just exposing kids to other opportunities, I think, at a young age would be very important.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, public schools, especially in Chicago, it's a touchy subject. I think that parents, there's just no substitute. And my oldest daughter's 4 and just going to preschool now. But one thing I've noticed is there's a lot of really cool technology. And I know we're all technologists, but I was talking to someone before this. Bubble Guppies is a television show on Nick Jr., for those of you that don't know. If you don't have a preschool-aged kid. If you do have a preschool-aged kid, you know all about the show. But they just came out with an iPad app that's actually math. It's real math, and it also teaches healthy eating, but in ways that the kid has no idea, and they just think it's really fun to feed rhinoceroses grapes, right? And it's like, things like that, they're subtle, and they're really influential to young kids when you start thinking about doing, playing a race car game that has the signs along the way on the path, and it actually is math problems that go through and think quantitative and logic. And I think that when I think back on my public high school, and I went to Michigan State, I was never really challenged with logic and reasoning to a degree until I hit programming, and that was post-grad. And that, for me, was when I got turned on to education. It wasn't, everything else, you can coast through high school. You can coast through college. Not that I did, but I'm aware of people who have. And not really learn a whole bunch. But then when you get hooked, and then it's really on from there. And so I think that getting that hook earlier, and I think the way to do it is going to be through technology, but I have no idea how to get there given the current constraints on the system. And do you think it's realistic that, public elementary schools are going to adopt iPads or tablet applications wholesale in the next 5-10 years? I hope so, but there's a lot of forces at play right now.
Parents and technology. I like it.
That's great. Yes, Michael.
First, I should say, Stephanie, congratulations on getting $1 million for IMSA from your co-founder of YouTube. That's great.
That's awesome.
Hey, so, Michael,
Yes.
the vendor relationship management movement, is it for real? And what does it mean to the business executives in this room who aren't necessarily tech? Can you talk about it?
Okay, so vendor relationship management is a phrase that, what is your name? That Michael was using to refer to the class or category of technologies that I was talking about as a data vault. So you have consumers here, you have a data vault here, and then you have vendors, Amazon, American Airlines, GE, whoever they may be, I'm making up those examples. And they can interact with your consumers, the consumers can interact with your vendors through this data vault, which may be called a VRM system or a vendor relationship management system. The phrase vendor relationship management is a couple decades old, and Michael sounds like sort of a ninja in this question, so bringing people up to speed. The concept of a VRM is not new. The biggest example that we can think of as an moment was Microsoft Passport. And you may not remember it, there's no real reason to remember it, but Passport was an attempt to be your door to the internet, your relationship manager. Then in the late 90s and early 2000s, the first cycle of the internet, there were a number of companies called infomediaries, which again sought to sit between the consumer and the vendor. There were substantial systemic problems with each of these attempts. Number one, there was nothing to do on the internet until fairly recently. I mean, at scale. There were not a lot of things to buy, do, or play with. Number two, there was no low-level anxiety about privacy or your data as there is now. My guess is every one of you have at least thought about the question of what your data mean to whom online, and you may not have thought about that as recently as 5 years ago. So there's a low-level anxiety today. There was a systemic problem with Microsoft in particular, which is that people did not trust Microsoft at the time, and there were other problems. So these attempts did not succeed, so Michael is quite properly asking, is this VRM moment real? I propose the answer is yes, but here's a more specific answer to your question. I did not set out to go raise $100 million from Sand Hill Road to do a science experiment called VRM, because this is a classic network effect problem. If you build it, they will not come. So you have to build something that brings people along and vendors along, establishes trust, and then populates your container, your VRM or your vault, along the way. So that's what we propose to do. So we have revenue lines that come from consumers and businesses that do that. So for that set of reasons, I think the answer is now yes, it is real. However, this is not going to be done or successfully by what I would consider to be, and they know I think about this, them this way, kind of the activist movement of the internet. I don't mean anonymous or so forth. I mean kind of the hacktivist guys who meet, twice a year to talk about why VRM is a good thing. You have to have scale and leverage and clout. And therefore, I think now is the moment. So yes, I hope that's responsive.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
I'd like you to explain a little further about the immigration issue that you have, because I think most of the people in this room think of it in terms of Democrats and Republicans and Mexico border and illegal immigrants in chicken factories and things like that. Can you explain why the immigration, what immigration means to you and what's wrong with it?
Can we start with the, we start and then you were just talking about it also.
Yeah, I mean, I had to experience it myself where I started, I guess I was able to get a visa because I was a student here that gave me the right to work for 1 year. Then looked for, to move on, I needed another visa. At that point, I already had a company that was working quite well, that was beginning to employ people, would have been great to keep me in the country, I think. But to get an H-1B, I would have needed to prove that I could pay myself market rate salary, which for a CEO was, you know, north of $100,000. When you're bootstrapping a business just getting started, pretty hard to afford to pay that. Managed to find another visa option, entrepreneurship visa that's not open to all countries at all. Happened to be able to figure that out. Had I not, I would have been forced to leave the country or get a job. If I could have got someone to sponsor me for an H-1B, I could have got a job. But the point being, there's a really strong movement now, but until recently, very hard for a foreigner to be in the country starting a business, which I would think would be the best, one of the best kind of immigrants, because of just these kind of restrictions that we're talking about. Yep. And then bringing in talent, it's so hard to find engineers. We brought in a lot of engineers from overseas. At the time we were doing that, it actually worked out pretty okay because the economy was in a recession. The H-1B cap was not getting reached. Yep. So we were actually able to bring people in. Now we're back in the world where it's reached again, and so there's literally people, a big backlog of people that are great top engineers, and I know there's a massive shortage of engineers of the US that can't come into the country because the cap has been reached. So it's these sort of issues of talent and the right type of talent. It's so hard to the point where, to your point, some of these people are saying, you know what, I'll go to Australia, I'll go to the UK, I'll go to Canada, I'll go somewhere else. And that's a massive loss, I think, to the US economy.
I'd like to take the last question if I could. Is that okay? You okay with that, Phyllis?
Yeah.
So you're all busy, you're all successful. What the heck do you guys do for fun? I want each one of you to tell me, what do you do to relax? What's your passion besides your business? Matt?
Bubble guppies.
What was that?
Bubble guppies.
Bubble guppies?
Yeah, no. You know what?
Bubble guppies.
I was just talking about bubble
Bubble
guppies.
guppies. Bubble guppies.
Did you totally
it's
zone?
the app where you learn math about hippos.
No, I just, you know, when I'm away from the job, I try to spend as much time at home with the kids, just playing around. Honestly.
Such a sucker's answer. You're going to make me look like such a schmuck.
I love my wife, I love my children.
What do you do when you're...
America.
I pray and talk to my kids. And I'm sticking to that answer, damn it.
Church.
Seriously? Okay. I like learning, and yes, I like my kids. I like learning and I like to sail. Okay, how about that?
Sailing.
Yeah.
Do you have your own boat?
No, I don't have my own boat.
All right.
No.
Sorry to ask such a personal question.
No, it's just, no. It's like, you know, no, I don't have my own boat. I would love to have my own. I don't.
I like to snowboard, I surf a little, I mountain bike, those kinds of sports.
Honestly, didn't do a whole lot of that when we're in the thick of Wildfire, though. So.
Are you doing some of that now from Atherton?
A little more.
Well, yes. Great. Well, with that, you know, this was a great session. Can we give them a round of applause and thank them all for coming? Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, guests.
Michael, I'm not going to ask you what you do for fun. I'm going to save that one. But on behalf of the Economic Club of Chicago, thank you, Michael, Matt, Victoria, and Michael for a fun and insightful program. We appreciate that you all were able to be with us today. And also thank you to our table leaders and members for your engaging discussions and thoughtful questions. And thank you all for being here. This meeting is adjourned.
All right.